The drive up to the mountains had been loud with music. Windows rolled down despite the cold, all of us shouting over the wind and the rattle of gear in the trunk. By the time we reached the trailhead, my throat was raw from singing along to songs we only half remembered the lyrics to. But the kind of raw that felt good, like laughter after crying. We tumbled out of the cars with the half-chaotic energy of people pretending to be more organized than we were. Strapping on packs, trading water bottles, and arguing over whose boots looked the least broken in. The sky above us was pale blue, the kind of washed-out color that promises the evening will come quickly. And the air smelled like resin and earth, sharper and cleaner than anything we had breathed in weeks. The trip had been my idea. The trail wasn't on most maps anymore, but I had found it on a dusty old hiking forum. Underrated, one comment had called it. Peaceful, barely anyone goes there these days. And that had been enough for me. After years of busy weekends and half-scheduled hangouts in coffee shops or bars, the idea of vanishing into the trees together felt like a promise we couldn't turn down. Mark was the first to start up the trail. He always liked to be first, shouldering his pack like a challenge. The man was built like a linebacker, even though the closest he got to exercise these days was lifting whiskey glasses and pizza boxes. And I could see the strain in his shoulders as he bounded ahead, although he wasn't about to admit it. Lana followed close behind, muttering under her breath about his pace, but I noticed the way her eyes softened every time he glanced back to check on her. They fought in constant low-level bickering, but there was an ease to it too, the kind of rhythm that only comes when two people know they're not going anywhere. Carla had a map folded neatly in a waterproof sleeve, her hair tied up in a knot that already looked practical enough to last 3 days without a mirror. She was the one you trusted to remember first aid kits and spare batteries. The one who had already checked the weather conditions 3 times before even leaving the city. And I loved her for it. We all did. Even if Mark teased her about being our designated adult. Jonah lingered near the back, falling into step with me. He was wiry, pale from too much time indoors. His dark hair always falling into his eyes. He had been quieter lately, retreating into himself since his breakup a few months ago. The rest of us tried not to press him too hard, letting him open up at his own pace. But I could see the grief still there in him, sharp and fresh, even as he forced little smiles when someone cracked a joke. He was my oldest friend. We had been inseparable since we were kids. And though time had added new layers, new people, new bonds, I still felt a protective pull toward him, stronger than toward anyone else. The climb began steep, switchbacks cutting into the side of the mountain, and our boots slipping sometimes on loose stone. Conversation came in bursts, between stretches of panting silence. Mark kept calling out fake motivational slogans. Push through the pain. Weakness is just weakness leaving the body. Until Lana threatened to hit him with her water bottle. Carla had timed our breaks to the minute, always making sure we stopped before anyone burned out, while Jonah and I mostly listened, saving our energy for the rhythm of step after step after step. By late afternoon, the trail leveled into a plateau, and we broke through a line of trees into a view so sudden and wide, it stole the words from our mouths. The valley fell away beneath us in rippling green, trees stretching like an ocean to the far horizon. And beyond them, the mountain rose jagged and sharp, their peaks catching the sunlight like glass. For a while, none of us spoke, just stood there with the wind in our hair, staring out as if we had stumbled into another world. The clearing just beyond the tree line was perfect for camp, a flat stretch of grass and earth, ringed by boulders and tall firs that offered shelter without crowding us in. We shrugged off our packs with groans of relief, and for a while, the clearing filled with the busy clatter of nylon and metal. Carla knelt in the dirt, hammering stakes into the ground with precise rhythm. Jonah crouched near a pile of branches, coaxing sparks into kindling with the kind of patience only he had. And Mark crashed back from the woods with an armload of firewood so big he could barely see over it, dumping it down like he had won a battle. "You may thank your hero now," he said, bowing. Lana threw a pine cone at him, but her grin betrayed her. When the fire finally caught and curled upward into flame, a sense of ease settled over us. We ate instant noodles straight from the pot, passed around trail mix, and pulled lukewarm beers from the packs, popping them open like treasure. Darkness fell fast, as it always does in the mountains. The fire became our center, its glow flickering across faces I knew better than my own. Mark told a story about the time he had nearly burned down his fraternity's house, trying to make popcorn, complete with hand gestures and dramatic reenactments. Lana kept correcting the details, each correction earning a louder protest, until we were all laughing too hard to follow the story anymore. Carla shared the memory of her first night shift at the hospital. The mix of terror and adrenaline. The way she had accidentally called a senior doctor Dad in front of a whole team of nurses. Jonah said little, but his smile lingered longer this time, his eyes catching the firelight with something almost like peace. The sky above us cracked white with stars. We leaned back against our rolled-up jackets, naming constellations we barely remembered, filling the gaps with nonsense stories about hunters and bears, and lovers in the sky. Someone, maybe me, maybe Jonah, started humming under their breath, and the tune carried, weaving in the wind. Later, when the fire had burned down to embers and the cold pressed close, we retreated into our tents. I lay in mine, listening to the others' muffled laughter, fading into quiet. The rustle of nylon as they shifted into sleep. The forest breathed around us, branches shifting with the wind, some birds calling out once and then again. It was vast, but I didn't feel small. I felt held, cradled by the sound of people I trusted, breathing close. The comfort of years condensed into this one night beneath the trees. Sleep came slow, but when it came, it was deep. And for a while, everything was only warmth and belonging. For a while, there was no shadow yet at the edges. The cold was the first thing I noticed that second morning, sharp enough to sting as soon as I unzipped the tent flap. The whole ground was silvered with frost. Thin sheets of ice stretched across puddles like fragile glass. Our breath hung white in the air as we shook sleep from our bodies, moving stiffly, tugging on layers of wool and fleece. Mark complained loudly, his voice booming into the trees, while Lana tossed him a hat from a pack and told him to stop whining. Carla had already lit the camp stove, her hand steady as she measured water into a pot. And Jonah crouched nearby, arms wrapped around his knees, his gaze somewhere in the distance. There was a quietness to the morning, the kind of hush that felt different from the city's silences. It wasn't absence of noise, but the presence of something vast, the forest holding its breath around us. The fire cracked and birds stirred overhead, but even those sounds seemed muted, softened, as though they belonged to another world we were only guests in. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal, bitter coffee, and dried fruit, but it felt hearty enough to warm us. By the time we packed up, the sun had risen high enough to melt the frost into dew. We shouldered our packs, tightening straps, and set back onto the trail, boots crunching against the earth. The path sloped steeper as we moved on, narrowing in places until we walked single file. The trees grew taller here, trunks so wide I had to tilt my head back to see where they branched. Moss clung thickly to bark, bright against the darkness of the wood, and ferns curled in lush carpets along the ground. The canopy thickened until the light dimmed into a greenish haze, the kind of light that made it difficult to tell how much time had passed. Conversation dwindled without anyone deciding it should. It wasn't that we didn't want to talk. It was that the forest demanded quiet. Every time a voice rose too loud, it felt out of place, like laughter in a church. Even Mark, who filled every gap as naturally as breathing, began to pace his words, his voice lowering as if he too sensed it. For hours we walked like that, our steps falling into rhythm. Every so often, a sound carried through the trees, the crack of a branch or the flutter of wings. But whenever I turned, I saw only green and shadow. Once, Lana stopped suddenly and pointed to a trunk, scored with deep marks, grooves carved higher than any of us could reach. Bear, Carla said, her tone calm but clipped. We all bunched a little closer together after that. When the trail dipped into a ravine, we paused by a stream to refill bottles. The water was so clear, it seemed impossible, sliding over stones in ribbons of silver. We crouched on the bank, scooping it up with cupped hands, and for a moment, the silence was broken by laughter. Mark spitting a mouthful dramatically when he declared it too pure for a city palate. Lana splashing him in retaliation. And Carla rolling her eyes so hard it was practically audible. Jonah sat with his boots in the water, watching it flow around his ankles. His expression caught somewhere between peace and melancholy. We ate lunch by a fallen log, spreading out packs and leaning against the rough bark. Carla handed out sandwiches again, each one still carefully wrapped, while Jonah brewed another pot of coffee, the smell bitter and familiar. Mark launched into a half-remembered story about his college roommate's disastrous camping trip, acting it out with such ridiculous flourishes that Lana doubled over laughing. Even Jonah laughed, quietly at first, but then louder, until his face brightened in a way I hadn't seen in months. I watched them all and felt that sharp ache of affection again, the kind that made the present moment feel sacred. The trail grew stranger as the afternoon went on. Roots bulged across the dirt in tangles like veins, forcing us to step carefully. Some of the trees twisted in odd ways, their branches spiraling like corkscrews. Once, we passed a clearing where no grass grew, only bare earth littered with feathers. White and grey, scattered in a ring as though some bird had been plucked clean here. Carla frowned but said nothing, and none of us lingered. By late afternoon, the light had shifted again, the green dimming toward grey. We were all tired by then, legs heavy, packs biting into shoulders. And when we found a small clearing ringed by firs, we decided to stop. The ground was uneven but dry, and we had learned not to be picky. We dropped our gear with groans, Mark theatrically collapsing onto his back until Lana kicked him to help with the tents. Firewood was scarcer here, damp with moss, but between Mark's brawn and Jonah's patience, they coaxed enough into a modest fire. We huddled close around it as the temperature dropped, eating noodles and jerky, our conversation quieter now, like the forest had pressed against our throats. The firelight flickered against the trunks, casting shadows that seemed to shift when you weren't looking. At some point, Carla began telling a story about one of her patients in the ER. A man who had claimed he could see people no one else could. Who whispered to corners as though they whispered back. Mark followed with a ridiculous story about the ghost of his GPA, chasing him through college, complete with moaning noises until Lana stuffed his mouth with a cracker. We laughed, but the laughter didn't carry far, swallowed by the dark. When I finally crawled into my tent, the quiet pressed in heavy. I lay awake longer than I wanted, listening to the forest breathe. The wind shifted through the branches in low, uneven sighs. Something scraped once, faint and rhythmic, like fabric brushing wood. I told myself it was only the trees shifting against each other, only the forest settling into night. But still, I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, as though that thin layer could keep the dark at bay. That night, I woke more than once, never fully sure what had stirred me. Sometimes it was the wind, shifting in the trees. Sometimes a creak that might have been nothing more than a branch heavy with dew. And once, I thought I heard footsteps crunching lightly on the undergrowth. Steady, deliberate, moving past my tent. I held my breath and stared into the dark nylon. But when the sound faded, I told myself it was just the forest settling. Sleep came back in uneasy fragments, shallow and fractured. By morning, the air was heavy, damp with mist that clung low to the ground. The fire pit was cold, ringed with ash and half-burnt sticks, and our breath lingered pale in front of us as we shook ourselves awake. Mark groaned about his back, stretching theatrically, while Lana muttered that maybe he should carry less beer and more padding in his pack. Carla already had her map out, tracing our progress with a finger, and her brow furrowed. Jonah sat quietly again, his hood up, staring at the trees, as though something there held him. We packed in near silence, the mist muffling every sound, and when we stepped back onto the trail, the air felt heavier, the kind of damp that seeps into clothes and skin. The forest looked different under the fog, the trunks stretching upward like pillars, disappearing into clouds. And the ground was soft and dark beneath our boots. Our voices, when we used them, felt too loud, and soon even Mark let them fade. The trail bent downward through a hollow, then rose again into thicker growth. Here the trees stood closer, their roots heaving the soil into ridges and dips. We picked our way carefully, Carla in front, Jonah trailing behind me. And every so often, I glanced back to see him staring into the fog, as though listening for something. Though when our eyes met, he gave me a thin smile and kept walking. It was early afternoon when the path split, a faint fog almost swallowed by brush. And the map showed nothing of it. Carla even checked twice, frowning, before deciding the left branch seemed more worn. We followed her lead, ducking through low-hanging branches until the trail widened again into a strange quiet. Even the birds had fallen silent, leaving only the sound of our own steps. Then the air suddenly shifted, carrying with it a smell faint but sharp, metallic, like rust or blood. At first I thought it was only my imagination, but I saw Carla pause and Lana wrinkle her nose. No one said anything though, and we walked on. The trees thinned abruptly into a clearing, and we stopped at its edge without meaning to, all of us falling silent at once. In the center of the clearing stood a tree that was not like the others. It was taller, its trunk thick and pale, bark peeling away in strips that curled like old paper. The branches arched outward in uneven angles, and from them hung shapes that stirred slightly in the breeze. For a moment I thought they were just sacks, bundles of bark or maybe moss. But then the light shifted through the mist, and I saw them for what they were. Skins. They hung open like emptied coats, stretched and pinned along the branches. Faces flattened, hands limp, the outlines of bodies, preserved but hollow. Some of them were small, animal hides tanned and shrunken from a fox or a deer, but others were unmistakably human. A face even turned towards us, its eyes stretched wide in a scream that had no sound, its lips pulled tight over teeth that were no longer there. The skin looked pale, grey, as though it had been drained of everything and left to dry in the air. No one spoke. I heard only my own heartbeat hammering in my ears, felt the sudden cold sink into my chest. Mark muttered something low, but it was cut off, his voice too thin to carry. Lana's hand shot out and gripped his arm, while Carla stood perfectly still, her jaw tight, her eyes locked on the tree as though trying to explain it with reason alone. Jonah stepped closer than the rest of us, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed upward like he was listening to something above us. The skins shifted faintly, stirred by a breeze I couldn't feel on my own face. They rustled against each other, a dry, disgusting sound like leaves in autumn. And this smell grew stronger the longer we stood there, metallic and foul, until I tasted it at the back of my throat. I wanted to say we should leave, turn back, and pretend we had never seen it. But the words never made it to my mouth. My tongue felt heavy, my body anchored where I stood. This tree seemed to draw us into its orbit, as though stepping away would take more strength than I had left. Jonah's voice broke the silence. "They are beautiful," he whispered. The sound jolted through me. I turned to him sharply, but his eyes were still locked on the skins, his face calm in a way that chilled me more than the sight itself. Carla slowly moved toward him, hand out as though to touch his shoulder, but he stepped forward instead, closing the space between himself and this tree. "Jonah," I said, my voice rough. "Stop! Don't!" He paused then, finally glancing back at me, and in his eyes there was something I couldn't quite read. Grief maybe, or wonder, or something else entirely. The wind stirred again, the skins rustled, and for the first time I thought I heard something in that sound. A faint murmur, like distant voices, low and indistinct, threading together in a language I didn't understand. My chest tightened. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to run, to drag Jonah and all of us away from that place. But none of us moved. We stood rooted at the edge of that clearing, caught between awe and terror, as the tree loomed before us and the skins whispered overhead. After a long time, we left the tree in silence, none of us willing to speak, none of us willing to admit that we had all seen the same thing. The forest didn't feel like forest anymore. It felt like something's body, and we were crawling deeper inside it with every step. The fog thickened around us as we staggered back toward camp, though I couldn't tell if it was the same camp we had left, or some other patch of ground the woods had delivered us to. The fire was nearly out, reduced to a handful of coals, and the shadows seemed hungrier than before. No one slept. We sat close, listening. Every few minutes, I thought I heard it, the faint rustle of skins shifting, dragging across bark. Sometimes it sounded above us, sometimes behind, sometimes so close I swore I felt it on my neck. Carla tried to keep busy feeding the fire, but her hands shook violently. Mark muttered directions to himself under his breath, staring into the dark. And Lana leaned against me, trembling so hard her teeth knocked together. Jonah just sat apart, arms wrapped around his knees, his face blank. The hours stretched, the forest pressed in, and then, sometime past midnight, the whispering started. At first I thought it was the wind through the branches, but the trees were still. These voices came soft, curling around the clearing in broken fragments. "It's all right. It doesn't hurt. Stay with me." Jonah's voice. Lana whimpered and clutched at my sleeve. Mark stood, his fists clenched. "It's not him," he hissed, though his voice shook. "It's not him." But Jonah stirred. His head lifted, his eyes went wide and glassy, fixed on the fog. "I can hear it," he whispered. "It's calling me." Carla reached for him, but he stood before she could. Jonah, sit down," she ordered, her voice firm but cracking. He didn't. He walked to the edge of the clearing, toward those whispers. We all shouted his name, curses, anything to stop him. But he kept going, as though pulled on invisible strings. Then the fog opened. A strip of pale hide whipped out, so fast I barely registered it before it coiled around his chest. Jonah just gasped, a sound more startled than afraid, before he was yanked off his feet and into the dark. We chased after him, screaming, crashing through the brush. But we were too slow. The fog thinned just enough for me to see him thrashing as the thing lifted him, wrapped him, absorbed him. His mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came. His face bulged against the folds of shifting skin. And then he was gone. Jonah's whispers joined the others, circling us from the trees. Carla froze, her eyes wide and wet. Lana sobbed into her sleeve, and Mark swore and stumbled back to the fire, as if it could protect him. This monster stepped into the clearing. It was tall, too tall, shoulders hunched beneath a burden of pale folds that swayed with each step. Skins draped over its frame, stitched and layered. Some were stretched so tight I thought they would split. Others hanging loose like laundry in the rain. Faces shifted beneath them, pressing outward for moments before sliding back. Mouths opening in soundless cries. None of us moved. None of us even breathed. Then this thing raised an arm. From its sleeve of dangling skins, something unrolled. A strip of pale hide, long and thin, like a whip. It lashed out with a crack. Mark screamed as it coiled around his arm. He fought it, stumbling, trying to wrench free. But the monster pulled him off his feet, as if he weighed nothing. He clawed at the ground, his nails tearing against the dirt, screaming for help. But we did nothing. We couldn't. The lash reeled him closer, and when he struck the monster's body, the skins parted. For a moment, he was visible inside, his face contorted in terror, his mouth wide in a howl that didn't reach us. And then the fold sealed over him. His features smeared across its shifting surface. His scream joined the chorus whispering in the air. And Mark was gone. Lana shrieked and bolted for the trees. "No, no, no," she cried. But the fog was solid, smothering. She stumbled back, and the lash found her, wrapping around her waist. She screamed for me, her voice breaking, nails tearing bloody grooves into her own skin as she tried to claw it off. It dragged her back, inexorable. Her hand reached for mine, fingers brushing the air just short of my own. And then she was pulled into the folds, her face pressed outward for one final instant, mouth open in silent plea. And then she melted into the shifting bulk. Carla was the only one left beside me. She didn't run. She didn't back. She drew the knife from her belt, her jaw clenched. "Run," she whispered. I couldn't. My legs refused. The monster turned its shifting face toward her, and the skins shivered. It let out a sound then. Not one voice, but many. A scream layered a dozen deep, splitting the air so hard my ears rang. Carla didn't falter. She lunged and drove the blade deep into its chest. The knife disappeared, swallowed by the folds. But the monster shuddered once. Then its lash snapped out, coiling her throat, lifting her from the ground. Her knife clattered to the dirt, her lips moving. I think she tried to say my name, but no sound came. Her body was pulled tight against the mass. The folds opened again. And then she too was gone. Silence again. Then it turned its gaze to me. The fire sputtered low, its last glow painting the skins in shifting red. Faces moved beneath them. Jonah, Mark, Lana, Carla, sliding in and out of the surface like drowning things. The lash unrolled once more, hissing through the air, and stopped just short of my face. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The monster bent low. The smell of rot and damp leather choked me. A dozen eyes blinked across its surface, all fixing on me at once. The lash quivered, hovering in front of my mouth as if waiting to taste my breath. Then, slowly, it withdrew. The thing straightened, the folds of skin rustling like leaves in a wind that wasn't there. It lingered for a moment, towering above me, before it simply turned. It dragged itself back into the fog, the whispers fading with it, until I stood alone. Alone, with the fire and the silence and the memory of what I had seen. I don't know why it left me. I don't know why it took them and not me. But sometimes, when the trees shift and the night grows quiet, I hear their voices. Jonah's laugh, Mark's scream, Lana's sobs, and Carla's final command, fluttering through the dark like skins brushing against one another. And I know it's only waiting for me to stop running.